So, ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce the panel. We have Andrew Burgess, who is an advisor to C-level executives sitting there at the end. Then here I have Jonathan Cosgrove, who's Associate Director and Program Manager and Advisor to VP-level executives at HR and other IT corporate functions at the European Bank of Redevelopment. Then we have Ricky Delandro. Ricky is Head of Business Innovation for Corporate UK Banking at HSBC. He's been in this business for over 20 years, and he used to be in the banking structured products section, but with his natural curiosity for new technology, he headed into the innovation part of the business. Last but not least, Richard Tang, who is the founder and CEO of Zen Internet. He founded it in 1995. And having asked his brother, I love this bit, having asked his brother in the pub whether he thought the internet would take off. And luckily, he said yes.
He did.
So we get a lot of similar questions often from our clients, and it's often to do with the challenges that they face with AI and RPA. But some of that relates to their suppliers. They're now saying to us, actually, what should I ask my suppliers to do? And some of these are service providers and outsourcers. Maybe I'll put that first to you, Ricky. Do you expect different things from your suppliers and service providers now with the advent of business process automation?
I think the short answer is yes. Outsourcing in general, the model is changed. A robot nearshoring via robotics is cheaper and more efficient in many ways than the old models. And we're seeing some of the providers like Infosys, Wipro are actually trying to automate themselves to stay competitive. But I'd say not just with big companies like HSBC, but in general, more and more firms are expecting suppliers to meet them more than halfway. They'll have an interface at their procurement teams, and they'll have to invoice in a certain way or they're not going to get paid. So I think, as I said earlier, we're all becoming healthfully impatient, and suppliers, the expectations of consumers and therefore people in businesses continually get higher and higher.
Right. Maybe I could ask you, Andrew, as well, the same question. You and I have worked in the world of global services for some time, and I have seen a shift in what service providers are doing. What's your perspective on that?
I mean, it's interesting. When I first came across RPA, which was about 7 years ago, and I think it's even before it's called RPA, but having a background in outsourcing advisory, saw RPA and had this light bulb come on in my head saying, here's a technology that's going to fundamentally change the BPO market, because everything that you can outsource to India has to be rules-based and repetitive and scalable. Oh, that's the same criteria used to automate. So, something big's going to happen here. But that was 7 years ago, and, it's some suppliers have moved, but a lot of them have moved very, very slowly. And I think a lot of that's around the mindset of the suppliers, which is we provide FTEs, and to get out of that mindset is really, really challenging. And then if they do that and they adopt RPA, then they have to cannibalize their own revenue as well, which doesn't go down well within a business with quarterly targets. But I think what we're seeing now is that automation is a selection criteria that clients are using, and they, if you don't have that on your capabilities, then you're not going to be able to compete on price with the suppliers that do have it. Right.
Jonathan, did you want to add anything?
I would agree with everything that everybody's just said. I'm actually on that journey at the moment. So about 8 months ago, I kicked off a program to do some outsourcing within my organization. And when we launched the RFP into the market and started to get the solutions back, everything was automated. So even though we were pricing FTE for FTE, everything was coming back automated. So then when I talked to the suppliers, I was saying, surely this is like turkeys voting for Christmas, right? Because that's your play. But you notice the pivot in the market, that they're starting to develop different solutions and obviously give something back. But the great thing from our end is that the model that I've deployed is a boat model, excuse me, which is build the center, get our third party to operate our processes, get them to automate the processes. Then the final part of it is the transfer bit, that you execute a transfer to another third party, or you bring it back in-house at your point. So typically you model that out for 5 to 7 years in order to get your labor arbitrage, right? But now we're asking ourselves, do we execute that transfer a little bit earlier because we get the benefits a lot quicker? And then the question is also the nearshoring versus offshoring. When you start to automate, we can operate those processes. And from a change management perspective, that means that we can start to build capabilities a lot quicker internally, like our business process owners, and we start to get the value add a lot quicker. So that was the long way of saying, yes, I do agree that I'm now expecting a lot more from that RFP I launched into the market.
Good.
Yes, well, I think that's a really big topic in itself, and at some point I think we should discuss it in more detail, particularly how the pricing will change and whether the move to transactional kind of pricing and maybe gain sharing, those things will happen. So we'll hopefully get another opportunity to discuss that another day. Another thing that I hear a lot about, and particularly from our clients, is the challenges that they didn't expect to have when automating using RPA. And I know, Ricky, you've done a lot of RPA automation. Things like something that I mentioned earlier, which is it increases the straight-through processing, and then suddenly you get a flood of exceptions that the robots can't handle, and people weren't expecting quite the same level of exceptions. Yeah, but
I'd say in a good way. Sometimes you have a bottleneck in the process, so that will have alerts as somewhere we need to look. Your process engineering team will already know about it. They'll already be looking how they can make things better. I guess some of the things that we've done, it's a bit of a nuance, is actually just automate a bad process. I know some people will be offended by that probably, because if we have a situation where you've got a deadline, okay, and that's the first time I've been told I'm not loud enough, so that's if you're trying to hit a deadline, we'd have had no problem going out to recruitment firm and getting people in to do a bad process, more people to do a bad process. But there seems to be this sort of want not to give computers the task of doing those things. But what we found is, to your point, if you, in the first instance, can just get things done more quickly and relieve the pain point in part A, you'll actually find that it's been hiding problems further down the process. And then you will see that in one instance literally explode in other parts in terms of issues. So you're completely right. You have to have a holistic view as much as possible, but don't let that stop you doing, because generally we've learned an awful lot more by doing.
I completely agree. Learn by doing and sort of understand the limitations better. I'll come back to this subject. I'm sure there'll be questions from the floor as well. But, Richard, I was going to ask you, a lot of people are still frightened of AI. They think it's a really sort of unknown thing, and they're worried about it also going terribly wrong. But a natural sort of journey for enterprises is to do the RPA stuff, learn about codifying their processes, and then moving to AI, but it still seems quite slow. What do you think is sort of stopping them? Why aren't we further ahead in that field?
I think there's a couple of points. Going to the point of actually just touching back on the point of challenges. RPA is a great tool. So many organizations got a lot of different systems, and RPA provides a way of gluing those systems together and automating mundane tasks. But what the other way to look at it is, the more glue that you put in place, the more difficult it will be to actually reinvent those legacy systems to the systems that you actually want, the integrated systems, and the integrated systems that all the new startups have the benefit of building from scratch versus the legacy systems that are in place. I think moving on to the question of AI itself, and is it scary? Is it not scary? At the moment, it's not scary at all. When people think about AI, they think about it potentially being scary because so many times people will put up a image of Terminator and they'll think, that's where AI is going. And we think in those ways because as human beings, we have a natural tendency to violence. we have that tendency because, and I'm not just talking personally, but evolution has required us to have a tendency to violence. Now, AI doesn't need that trait to develop and become more sophisticated and more intelligent. So I'm quite optimistic, actually, that the Terminator thing won't grow out of the AI companies, and that UiPath will not be Cyberdyne Systems.
Thank you. Jonathan, have you faced these kind of worries and challenges in your enterprise? Maybe you could tell us what your perspective is on that.
Absolutely. So from my perspective, our AI challenge is really about data. Mm-hmm. So if I think about our journey of doing robotics within my institution, the first part is, and I'll go the other way, Ricky, I'll say that we've spent quite a bit of time optimizing our processes, just because we've had all our processes have been in people's heads. So the RPA journey has been the opportunity for us to create the user manuals, to create the process guides, to create the SOPs, to document the policies and all of that kind of stuff. But we're still at the start of that journey, and that's obviously all the mechanisms that you need in place for RPA to work in the first place. And then for RPA to evolve, to take on the AI component, we have to have our own analytics functions and everything else in place in order to support that, which is something that we're building. So the challenge from the enterprise side is, and we talked about this earlier on today, is enterprise debt. So we have a lot of legacy systems that, in terms of upgrading them to get access to the data in the way we want to, so we can use it in a more intelligent way, is a really, really difficult challenge. So the questions that we're posed with at the moment is, do we invest in upgrading so we can do that? Or do we start to take those systems out and move into a more cloud-based environment where we can start to deploy solutions in a more effective way? So they would be our challenges, I would say, on the enterprise side.
Right. Andrew, you're really involved with AI. Tell us what we know.
I think to your point, there is one thing that AI does is generalize. So one of the things that people think is their data has to be perfect before they think they can do anything valuable with it. But because AI generalizes, then you might only need it to be sort of 80% accurate, because you're just getting a generalized solution out of it. The challenge is maybe the 20% that you think is inaccurate is actually the really important stuff, and that's where the outliers lie, and that's where the real value is. So that's where the role of the data scientist comes in, and this is why it's more of an art than a science, to be honest. But I think any AI project, getting the data in the right format and in the right place and understanding it is, a large part of any AI project, and you should never underestimate the amount of time that's going to take.
So cloud has been a big enabler of AI, hasn't it? Because it gives us the on-demand capacity, computing power that we need. And yet, I still see a lot of enterprises being reluctant to, connect to a cloud system and do some of the analysis, run some of those algorithms, do the data crunching and so on. Is this something that you think will eventually shift?
Yeah, I think talking from experience, when we launched our cloud service, which was about 5 years ago, we did get some reluctance from customers, things like data sovereignty, and
yes.
I quite like having my own little server room and I know where everything is. I'd say now, I don't see that at all. We don't see that at all. We see our customers absolutely clamoring to get the maximum benefits from the cloud. And so some of them, yes, they're just moving their existing infrastructure into the cloud, but then of course they don't get the full benefits. And some of them are then going the longer route to say, no, I want to move my infrastructure into the cloud, but I want to get all the benefits from having a cloud-based set of systems as well. But I think the days of having doubts about the cloud are gone. We're overwhelmed with cloud business at the moment, which is great.
Yeah, fantastic.
It's not exactly the topic that we're covering today, but if you look at the explosion of Shopify, or even the market stall traders who are now effectively, they are based solely on a cloud generated solution, which allows them to have everything from financial transaction processing through to the social media marketing provided for them. Things that would have been out of their reach are now being made affordable because of the cloud and because of the automated solutions behind those things.
So given that, we've got the computing capacity and so on, and there are many products on the market now that provide different types of AI-based capabilities, what's your forecast for AI becoming as widely adopted as RPA, albeit even, RPA is still at its early stages? What do you think? Another couple of years? Andrew, what are you seeing?
The thing is, AI is many different technologies, so it's a kind of catch-all for lots of things, whereas RPA is one thing. So an RPA is kind of, it's developed as far as it can. Everyone's just adding bells and whistles at this point. So it's reached its kind of plateau. AI, because it's lots of things and it's continually evolving, then I don't think we're never going to see this point where it's going to plateau. People are going to develop new solutions on AI as well. So there will always be that kind of chasing the new technology, the cutting edge approach, I think.
Right.
I'd say as well, it's the proliferation of data. We were talking about it earlier today, that this year's Christmas present is probably the Buzz Christmas present will be Alexa, the Google Home Assistant. There's going to be more and more and more information gathered. And as individuals, we are going to want our digital assistants to suggest more things to us and know what we want before I even ask for it. So it's in that particular, to your point about narrow AI, I think there will be a proliferation of more narrow AI solutions, but the consumer will come to expect in certain industries that they have a concierge-like service more often than not.
I want that in my office. I want to be able to talk and, instead of having to type everything. And at the moment, it's not good enough for me to do that, what I have available on my desktop.
That's my pet project, because you have almost the digital exhaust of, think of our relationship managers in corporate banking. They, the amount of meetings they have, there's a whole load of actions that come from meetings, and we don't spend enough time studying those actions versus the outcomes. We could see what actions come from good meetings, what actions come from bad meetings. And therefore, you can imagine through digital assistants being able to train people more quickly and offer value in that regard. So I see it more being going from RPA as maybe being the summer intern that you get to do the boring stuff that you don't want to do, to digital assistants not exactly being maybe sitting next to you a sensei or something like that, but just giving you guidance or asking you what if like questions. Like Jarvis in
So some of that exists for contact center agents, but I don't see why that can't be for all information workers. Let me pose that to the audience here. We've touched, we ask you actually to tell us what you think, and maybe if you have a question for the panel. So is anyone currently using voice-activated interfaces at work rather than at home? No. Would you like it? Yes, you are? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I've been playing around with a couple of solutions just to trial them, not necessarily in the live environment, but been playing around with dialogue flow and things like that, just to kind of almost mimic a chatbot that people can dial into and get directed in the right manner. So.
Right, okay.
See, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to ring up your HR department and say, how many days holiday have I got left? And that's answered by an Amazon type or Alexa type interface. The simple queries could be done.
Yes, sure. Did you want to add anything, Jonathan?
No, that's just a really good use case, and that's something that we're looking at the moment about how we deploy chatbots in that space, and then a little bit more sophisticated on the banking side, to build on the example that you were giving, Ricky, from the digital assistant or that summer intern. I mean, we have an army of interns that do financial spreading and financial modeling for bankers. I mean, that's a lot of capacity that we can deploy an AI solution to free that up so we can change our business model and do more business.
Think back to forecasting the future of RPA plus AI and building on what Andrew said about the RPA plateauing, but the AI still having a long way to go. I guess we use the term artificial intelligence today, but I would argue it's not really, what we're putting in is not really intelligence. AI has some very good specific use cases like image recognition and classification. So if your application requires image recognition and classification, then that would be a great bolt-in to an RPA solution. But as AI technology advances and we make breakthroughs so that the AI starts to understand what it's doing at the next level higher, it starts to understand the context of the process overall, then it'll open the door to a whole heap of new possibilities for the RPA vendors to say, okay, well, we can tap into that and we can start actually understanding what this process is intended to do. So we really can start recommending improvements, proper improvements to the process, the sort of improvements that you would expect a human analyst to be able to do. And of course, then that will be the next revolution, and there'll be a huge buzz there. So I think there's a long way to go because of these advancements.
That's a key point, though. The appreciation of what good looks like is something that in all organizations, if you've got a top performer, you might spot and say, Andrew's great at his job. What we find is if Andrew was great at task A and Bob was great at task B, it takes too long to identify that. And then it takes too long, therefore, to spread that mastery of a given task across an organization. And I actually think that's where a lot of the ability to process a lot of that data, and once AI in particular can identify that's good and suggest it to others, to your point, Richard, I think that's when it will really prove its value.
Yes, so there are systems that do that, but they're not widely used. This is why, I'm sort of baffled by all of that. I'm going to let Andrew do this wrap up for us, and maybe we could leave a couple of minutes for questions from the floor. Would that be okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just thought I'd cover a couple of points around how do you actually start your automation journey. A lot of people kind of see that they've whetted their appetite and want to do something, but where do they actually start that point? That journey, and particularly in relation to artificial intelligence. And then I'll talk a little bit about carrying on the point you just made around where the future is for both RPA and AI. So in terms of starting your journey, what a lot of people do, which I think is the wrong approach, is say, right, we'll do a proof of concept. I've seen my competitor do something, or I've read something in the In-Flight magazine, and it looks really interesting, therefore we'll get a company in and we'll do a proof of concept. And that POC might be successful and might give them something valuable at the end of it. But then because they haven't done the strategy piece at the beginning, that proof of concept might be actually only the ninth best thing they could have done. And there's 8 other things that would have given them much more value, or 8 other things that would have been much easier to achieve than the one they've actually done because they picked it at random. So I think doing the AI strategy piece is really fundamental to making sure that you're going to have success in these projects. So what do I mean by AI strategy? Well, that's around, one, understanding your objectives and your challenges. So, I get clients ring me up and say, how can I use AI in my business? And effectively what they're asking is, can I have an AI, please? And it's obviously the wrong question to ask. The question is, what are my business objectives? What are my challenges? And can AI and RPA meet those objectives and challenges? So once you've got to that point, then it's a case of understanding the ambition of the organization in doing this. And particularly with AI, the capabilities of AI are transformational. So an organization could think, well, we actually just want to improve some processes, which is relatively straightforward, and there's nothing wrong with that approach. But actually, you might think, we want to fundamentally transform our business. We maybe want to create a digital twin of our current business based on AI and RPA and challenge our legacy business. And there's a whole range of stuff in between. So depending on your ambitions, depends on how you're going to start. The first step you take is going to be different, whether it's one end of the spectrum or the other end of the spectrum. So once you understood that, then you can start to map the capabilities of these technologies of RPA and AI against those challenges and objectives of the business, and effectively build a heat map of those opportunities and a list of those, each opportunity with the business value it's going to deliver, how easy it's going to implement, the risks of doing each one. So you can get a prioritized list of those, And from that, a business case and a roadmap. And that really wraps up into an AI strategy. I think having that, first of all, gives you your roadmap, gives you your direction, and importantly, gives you the way to articulate all of that to your stakeholders as well, particularly at a senior level. Because if you don't get that buy-in at a senior level, particularly with AI, then it's not going to work. So the AI strategy, I think, is fundamental. The other bit that people forget as well is what happens after that proof of concept. And with a proof of concept, you might get a nice spreadsheet with some numbers that maybe they predict customer churn or something. We think that's great, but then actually somebody in the business has got to be able to use that number to make decisions. They've got to be able to use it every day, look at that number and have actions. And without those actions, the spreadsheet's not really valuable at all. So how are you going to deliver that to somebody? How are you going to integrate it with your enterprise systems? How are you going to make sure that the data feeds are correct? How are you going to make sure that the model's continually optimized? How are you going to make sure it's secure? All these things, there's kind of the boring side of AI, but you have to think about those things early on. Otherwise, you're going to do the proof of concept, you're going to get the spreadsheet, and people are going to forget about it and move on to something else. You've got to make sure you think about integrating it into the end services. So that's, in a few minutes, just how I think you need to start your AI and RPA journeys. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about was where these technologies are going next. And we just kind of started to cover this a little bit in terms of where RPA is. And I think there's very different answers for where RPA will be in the future and where AI will be in the future. AI will inevitably become commoditized. My background is actually as an outsourcing advisor. And I haven't done that for 5 years now, but when I started doing it 20 years ago, we had outsourcing consultants and we all did outsourcing projects. And eventually outsourcing just became business as usual. It just became part of the normal transformation efforts that are going on in a business. And at the moment we have RPA consultants and we have RPA projects. But again, in a few years' time, these are just going to be part of the IT transformation project or the business transformation, and it's just going to be another tool that companies can use to help run their businesses, make them more efficient. And if you take that even further, I always like to the little thought experiment of, say you're the UI designer, user interface designer for a big application, maybe SAP or Oracle. So you spend all your day building nice user interfaces for your software. And at some point, you get this moment, you think, actually, I've got more robots using my software than I do people. Why am I bothering making it all fancy and user-friendly? Why don't I just have a table of data on here that the robots can access? And why do I even need to display it at all? And then you get to the point, then you're sort of on the road to the APIs. And as soon as I think APIs become as easy to implement as RPA is at the moment, then RPA will just become irrelevant, and these new types of APIs will become the way that systems are talking to each other, which at the moment is humans, and RPA will just become these direct interfaces. So RPA, I think, is as a shelf life of maybe 5 or 10 years from now. AI is very different. As we said, it's a range of different technologies. It's continually developing. I think right at the moment, there's this perfect storm. We talked a little bit about this earlier on. We've got far more data than we've ever had before. We're creating more data, and AI feeds off data. So the more data we have, the more value we can get out of the systems. And once we've got that data, we need to store it somewhere. Data storage has gone dramatically cheaper over the last 10 years, and will get cheaper and cheaper. It's gone from buying a hard drive, a 5 megabyte hard drive for tens of thousands of dollars to pennies now. So that's taken away one of the big limitations, and obviously cloud is part of that story as well. The third thing is processing power. So computers are much more powerful than they ever used to be, and that's really important for AI because you need to run these models, and particularly the more complex models used to take weeks to run, but now can be done overnight or within hours or sometimes just minutes, depending on the complexity of the model. And that's really important because a lot of AI development is around iteration. So you try one thing, that hasn't quite worked, so you tweak something, maybe one of the features, and run it again. And if that takes days or weeks to do, you're limited in what you can achieve. But faster computers means that we can do that much more efficiently, get better results. And the last thing is everything's connected together. So the internet is kind of fundamental to this, but everyone can learn from everybody else. And particularly, again, going back to data, there's so many more publicly available data sets for AI to learn from. So you can access data sets like MNIST, which is handwritten numbers. There's facial recognition databases. All of this is used to train AI. And without that, the models aren't going to be good enough. So I think this perfect storm is really exciting now, and that's what's really driving AI. But you have to remember, all this is just narrow intelligence, as Sarah started to say in her talk, artificial narrow intelligence. So AI is very good at doing one thing very well, sometimes as good as a human or better than a human, but it can only do one thing very well. And to create a really good application, you might have to have a number of different AI processes that you kind of bring together to create an overall. But the intelligence, the cognition here, where we start to think about artificial general intelligence, isn't here yet. And it depends on your point of view. Some people think it's decades, which Rich and I were talking earlier on. I probably think it's further on, if it's ever going to happen at all. But just to give you kind of one final point on this, and to show you where AI is, some of you have heard of AlphaGo Zero, which is a gaming AI that DeepMind created, which beat the best player in the world at Go, and Go's a very complex game. It's a Chinese game. It's on a 19 by 19 board. There's more moves on a Go board than there are atoms in the universe. So to give you an idea of the complexity of that, and people didn't think that AI could solve this problem for decades, but actually DeepMind did that. When they first trained it for AlphaGo, the first AlphaGo, they trained it on lots of games of humans playing humans, which is great. And it learned very quickly from that. I think it's 30,000 different games it trained on. And then it started playing itself and got very good very quickly and beat the best player in the world. Then they created AlphaGo Zero. And the difference between AlphaGo and AlphaGo Zero is that AlphaGo Zero didn't use humans as its training base. All they did, they got one version of AlphaGo Zero and one very slightly different version and started to play itself. And at the beginning, it was crap. But very quickly, it learns how to play, and it develops moves, etc. And again, it beats the best player in the world at Go. The really interesting thing is, though, professional Go players were looking at how AlphaGo Zero was playing, and they noticed that it was coming up with moves that people hadn't recognized before, hadn't played before. So in effect, it was being creative. So I think this is the first idea of AI becoming creative, coming up with something that the human hadn't come up with before, because it wasn't encumbered by being trained by a human. It had the freedom to come up with solutions by itself. So I think for me, this is where the really exciting stuff for AI comes in, where we actually might come up with things that are really helpful that we haven't even thought about before. But obviously there's a downside of that where it could be very dangerous as well. And that's for the kind of the risky bit and the exciting bit about AI. That's it.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just wondered, we probably have time for one question, if anybody has any questions. Yes, Michael.
I was going to ask, if RPA only has a shelf life of 10 years, what does that mean for the RPA companies?
If you look at their valuations, they certainly don't think they're only going to be around for 10 years, or they're going to very much morph into the AI companies of the future. I think there are lots of inefficient, it's unbelievable with the world's largest financial organization, the amount of repetitive rule-based tasks that take place, the marketplace for the simple stuff, as you put it, is huge. And again, even just in the processing of MI, you can do that with the simple stuff for a long time. So I think there's a lot longer lifespan, but I do think it will be the gateway drug to AI for lots of other players.
I think the other thing that you've got to ask yourself is how many organizations out there are using systems that are more than 10 years old, systems that are 15 years old, 20 years old, and processes that are 15 and 20 years old. There's loads, isn't there? So to think that in 10 years, everyone will put these shiny new systems in is, it's just not going to happen.
We have fax machines and HSBC stuff. It's not the principal means of communication, but we still have them to prove the point.
What about memos? You've got those little orange envelopes.
I don't want to divulge any more secrets before you all change your banks.
Maybe last word from you, Jonathan, on that.
I would agree. I think it's a question of adoption. It took us long enough in the financial service industry to start to adopt RPA. And even while we're on that journey and doing the process optimization to accommodate that, I still find in certain operations functions that I have Sarah printing off a piece of paper to walk 5 feet to hand it to John. And breaking that habit is quite hard. So institutionally, you have to break another habit in terms of adopting that as well. And then the new APIs that come out in the future, we have to be willing to accept those as well. But in the current setting, RPA is driving quite a lot of value for us. I would echo Ricky's point that every day we're finding more and more transactional activities that we didn't really understand were there. But it's about having some mechanisms in place. And you spoke about the AI strategy, which I think is really, really important. And I agree with you. We don't do proof of concepts. Every bot that we've implemented, we've put a ratio of 1 bot to what FTE is it freeing up. And in regards to that FTE free up, what are we doing with that? Because if you don't have a plan, it's just a game of musical chairs. You have a load of employees standing around with their process being taken care of. So you really have to think about the capabilities of the future and start to train those people to operate in those capabilities of the future now. Because for me, AI, RPA, in this grand scheme of things and outsourcing, they're just a component of your operating model. And if the purpose is to make a more strategic operating model that adds more value to the business and creates more value-add jobs, then that's the part that you need to focus on. Yeah.
Thank you very much. A super discussion. Love to continue, but we've run out of time. I'd like to say thank you to the panel. Please put your hands together for them. Thank you. Thank you very much.